Oh my gosh, Howie, run for it! It's the Strawman army! So we've got a guy here called God Lowdown, who seems to think that atheism is in and of itself a belief. And it is not. Many atheists have come to their atheism through a certain kind of belief, but atheism at its heart, at its most pure, is only not having a belief in God. Let's have a look at some of his rather horrible straw man arguments on this matter.
Now, this argument is essentially an objection to the notion that atheism is a view or a belief. Atheists really seem to hate those words used to describe atheism.
Well, try to look at it this way. Without adding theism on to your life, everybody starts out as an atheist. Atheism is, like it or not, the default position. So the point is that you don't have to have explicitly said to yourself, God does not exist. You don't have to have experienced the notion of God to not have belief in it. So atheism is, in fact, the default and does not require a decision. So when you try to say that atheism is as much a position as theism is, you're getting it wrong, even though a lot of atheists have taken an explicit position. It's just not required. That's what's being said here.
So they argue that atheism is not a belief, but a non-belief, and nothing more than that.
But atheism is not a belief, not in the sense that a religion is a belief. I mean, we're not going around, there is no God, it doesn't consume our lives, we don't go to atheist temples to worship the fact that there's nothing there. Atheism is not a faith, it's not a religion. It may be a position taken, it may be an intellectual position. I suppose in that way it might be a belief, but what it's not is some sort of alternate anti-religion. That's what it's not.
Let's let an actual atheist summarize this argument for us. Here's a real comment I pulled from one of my other videos. Theists just don't get it. Atheism isn't a view. It is nothing more than a lack of a belief in God.
And that's true. A person who has never made a decision in their entire life, they're not a theist, and there's only one other option, atheist. You see, the only way to not be an atheist is to be a believer in God. If you were completely ignorant, if you were a baby immediately out of the womb, you know nothing but I'm hungry, it's cold out here, wah, 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 you're not a believer in God and thus you're an atheist. Atheism does not have to be explicit disbelief in God. So, yeah, atheism is not actually a position. It can be, but it's not necessarily one.
This atheist, like so many others, says that atheism is not a view, which is, of course, absurd, because any opinion, judgment, or interpretation is, by definition, a view.
But again, atheism doesn't have to be an explicit view. Unless you're trying to say that theism is the default position, which it isn't, theism requires knowledge, then atheism is the default position. Having no belief in God is the default. You have to be taught that God exists, and therefore atheism is not necessarily an explicitly taken position. Atheism is just merely the absence of God belief, which is what we all start out with. So, while it's true that atheism can be an informed position and thus a view, it does not have to be. And it also doesn't have to be a reaction to theism. It could simply be just how you view the world and that's it. I mean, you're acting like atheism is necessarily a reaction to theism, and it's not.
Secondly, this atheist, like so many others, says that atheism is not a belief. It is strictly a lack of a belief in God, they say.
But you see, it's completely true. I mean, right now, yeah, I actively disbelieve in the gods that have been presented to me because they fail the test of evidence, and I don't believe in any other god because I see no evidence for one, but I'm not actively disbelieving the god concept explicitly, entirely. I'm open to the idea of a god existing, provided someone can show me evidence of one. So yeah, atheism is not the explicit position, God does not exist no matter what. That's not atheism. It can be. Someone can take that position and they are an atheist because they're not a theist, which is all an atheist is anyone who's not a theist, no matter how they're not a theist. But there are some of us out there who are willing to consider the possibility. We just aren't willing to consider it on faith. And so if you can show me that a God exists, the same way you can show me Howie here exists, hey, I might well be on board. So, yeah, your idea of what an atheist is rather more strict than what an atheist actually is.
Now, while that may be true from a strict dictionary perspective, let's look at this more practically.
In other words, let's redefine the word until it means what you want it to mean. Doesn't work like that, pal. Uh-oh, straw man alert.
For example, let's look at the following question. How did the universe come into being? To this question, there are really just 3 possible answers.
Actually, there's 4, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Number 1. The universe was created by an intelligent, transcendent cause.
If you're gonna say God done it, you gotta show me proof.
Number 2. The universe spontaneously popped into existence with no external cause.
Which, at the moment, given the evidence, seems most likely, but moving on.
And number 3, the universe is timeless and eternal, and therefore requires no cause.
And you left out option number 4, I don't know.
Now, theists obviously believe that possibility number 1 is the most probable explanation.
Even though they have no evidence for it whatsoever and have to run on faith. You know, which sounds a lot to me like they're just playing a game of make-believe the way a child would. But hey.
So it can safely be said that theists believe in a creator. But it could also be said that theists do not believe in an uncaused universe, nor do they believe in an eternal universe. So there are really 2 ways of identifying a theist: by what he or she believes in, or by what he or she does not believe in.
Oh, here's another straw man, because that's not true at all. You see, you could have no belief in those other 2 options and still not be a theist. The single, solitary way to be a theist is to believe that a God does exist. There could be some yahoo out there with some bizarre hypothesis about how the universe came to be that does not conform to the 2 others that you listed and also the 3rd you didn't. They may have some bizarre thing about interdimensional aliens causing a rift from their universe or reality into ours, spewing bits of their matter in there, thus creating our universe, or whatever, I don't even know. But they don't necessarily have to believe in a God, thus they are not necessarily theists. The only way to be a theist is to believe in a God. The only way to not be a theist, to be an atheist, is to not believe in God. So you can't say that not believing in those other 2 options makes you a theist. It doesn't work like that. Sorry. Straw man.
Therefore, if I follow atheist logic, I could argue that theism is not a belief. It is a non-belief in an uncaused or eternal universe.
But see, that's not the atheist belief, that's your belief. You've switched things around and made it sound as though the atheists were saying something that they're totally not. So, once again, straw man.
So, all you atheists out there, ask yourselves the following questions. Number 1, with no external creator, what do I believe is the best explanation for both of matter, energy, and space-time? What are the origins of the interactive forces of electromagnetism, gravity, strong nuclear force, and weak nuclear force?
Without God, you say? You make it sound as though with God is the default, and it's not. The question should be, where do we get those things in the first place? Not, without God, where do we get them? And you're basically saying that I have to first deny God and then come up with an alternative, when what we should really be doing is starting from scratch and trying to find out where things come from all on their own. If there is no evidence to point to God, well, then that was never a valid hypothesis to begin with, really. So, honestly, you're coming at this from what I have to call a preconceived notion, or basically a straw man argument at this point.
Number 2. With no intelligent designer.
Anyone else starting to see the pattern here? Everything seems to start from, okay, here's God, now compare everything to God. And that's just simply not how this works, not if you're going to think critically. As I say, we're fighting an army of straw men here. That's basically what's going on.
And number 3. With no ultimate moral authority, God.
Objective moral values don't exist. And once again, we've got the whole without God explain things, as if we're supposed to assume that God does exist, and thus, if we can't explain the world without him, well, we're defaulting to him, which is, of course, bullshit.
If you have an answer to any one of those 3 questions, then you, by definition, have beliefs.
Yes, we do, but not necessarily beliefs about God. You see, the questions you asked are loaded ones. They're essentially straw man arguments. I mean, you're telling us, without God, how do you explain blah and blah and blah? Those aren't the real questions. Those aren't the valid questions. They should be phrased, what is the origin of the universe? How do we explain the order found within it? And what is the origin of morality? Leaving God out of it entirely, unless that's where the evidence points. But you're jumping the gun, going, well, I'm pretty sure God is the explanation, so I want you to explain all of these things without God, if you can, and thus forcing us to have beliefs about God, rather than beliefs about the origin of the universe and morality and so on. You're just simply making straw man arguments, forcing us into a position we don't hold.
The only scenario in which you can say that your atheism is strictly a non-belief is if you answer all 3 of those questions with, I don't know and I don't care.
Except that your versions of these questions are loaded. They're starting out with God belief welded into them, when the actual question should be, what do you believe about the origin of the universe or the origin of morality? You should be asking us our position, not what is your position with regard to God interfering in those matters. So, as I say, you're basically making a straw man argument here. You're forcing us to take a position on your position rather than a position on the subject under discussion, under scrutiny.
It amazes me that I would need to explain these concepts to atheists.
Well, that's because your side is tainted. It's subjective and not objective. You're coming at this from a personal point of view rather than trying to examine the world with an unbiased eye. And that has led you, intentionally or not, to throw out about a bajillion, an entire army of straw man arguments at this point.
I mean, atheism is touted as a movement of free thinking embraced by intellectuals. But once again, we see atheists widely embracing an argument that is logically incoherent.
It only seems that way to you because you're looking at this whole thing through God-tinted glasses. I mean, you can only seem to see this as if it were a reaction to your position, and it's not necessarily. A lot of atheists have taken a look around the world and gone, this is what appears to exist, I'll go with that. And if God doesn't happen to be on that list because there's no evidence for the fucker, well, then we're atheists, regardless of whether we're reacting to theism or not. You just can't see that because you seem to be looking at everything, as I say, through God-tinted glasses. You might want to knock that off.
It certainly seems that when you dig beyond the rhetoric and the smokescreens, that atheists really don't think or behave much differently than, say, fundamentalist Southern Baptists. Okay, that's a wrap. Thank you for watching.
Okay, bye-bye. Here's hoping you've run out of straw to build all those straw men. 'Cause, man, I'm sorry, but you got it completely frickin' wrong this whole time. You wanna try again? Catch you like the plague, gang. Please take the time to rate this video. And hey, if you dig what I do, subscribe. You might also enjoy my webcomic, The Adventures of Kinneara Baxter. You'll find a link in the info bar, along with a link to my Zazzle store. Buy a t-shirt today. I'd rather be an atheist smartass than a religious dumbass.